activism, what activism is, how you can become an activist, why activism is necessary, and also talk about some of the challenges that people face as activists. So as you can see, we have a pretty big panel, but I am very sure that they will all be bringing a lot to the plate from all their different vantage points. They're a very interesting bunch of people. But I thought it would be remiss of me to not acknowledge that today is Human Rights Day, and just my thoughts, on the 62 years since the Sharpeville massacre, where 69 people were killed by the police while protesting apartheid pass laws. So this Human Rights Day, I think we should take the opportunity not only to reflect on how well we're doing in the upholding of these rights, but also to measure how actively these rights are being promoted and embedded in our society. I'm going to hand over to my first panelist to introduce herself, and we'll move down the line before we actually get into the discussion. Shaira?
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. My name is Shaira Kala, and I'm an activist and dabbling in filmmaking at the moment.
I'm Sia Sebonga Jangamandla. I am in my field an activist, I believe. So thanks so much for inviting me today. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Tandeka Gulembeki. I'm an activist for universal access to public broadcasting, and I'm also working on how not to victimize whistleblowers and human rights defenders. So campaigning to change the Protected Disclosures Act. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Mativi. I'm also an activist in the field that I'm currently working in. So my main focus is to empower young women in the field of martial arts, and yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Nkateko Blessing Meimani. I'm a fourth-year medical student that was studying in Kharkov, Ukraine. I'm a war survivor. Yeah.
Good day, everyone. My name is Delani Majola. I was drawn into activism through the work that I do at the Katrara Foundation, and I've never looked back.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Hayward. I'm co-facilitating this session with Comrade Zuki Pikorli, who works with me at the Daily Maverick. I want to make a few comments to set this discussion in motion and to provoke us into thinking and questioning, I think, most of all. I became an activist when I was about 13. What's moved me to want to stand up and fight racism and injustice was the murder of Steve Biko. From that you can probably date when I was born and how old I am today. I was 13 in 1977. I'm 57 now. So I've been an activist a lot of years, I hate to say. But the way I wanted to challenge us is by asking some questions. When I was much younger, I thought the world was a terrible place because of apartheid, because of colonialism, because of dictatorship and Stalinism. But as I look around the world now, in 2022, it almost seems to me that the world is even worse than it was back in the 1970s and 1980s. The session before us, we heard about femicide, gender-based violence on an epidemic level. In this country, we have, I think, 12 million people who are hungry on a daily basis. We have education systems that offer, we have massive unemployment. And we have crises like the climate crisis, which if I was a young person, I would be terribly scared about, because the next few decades are going to be very, very rocky in the world. And so I guess the questions that I ask myself is, why is it, and that I'm going to ask the panelists, or Zuki's going to start the discussion with the panelists, why is it that activism is still a minority thing? Why are so few people getting up? Or am I wrong? Are lots of people getting up to stand up, to protest, to take action, to organize movements? You know, I know, I think all of the people here, I asked that everybody be brought onto this panel because they've come into activism from different perspectives. Shaira Kala was a leader of the Fees Must Fall movement, is a leader now. Sia, I know through working in Makers Valley around sustainable food systems in that poor community. Tandeka, I'm not sure whether I'm older or slightly younger or the same age as Tandeka, but Tandeka has fought as a member of the SABC 8. She's fought for democracy. She's fought for social justice. Jennifer is, as she said, I don't know if she said it loud enough. She's a kickboxer. She lives in Hillbrow. She's a boxer. She works with an organization called Fight with Insight and is organizing young women in Hillbrow. Nkateko, he didn't say it loud enough. He was in the Ukraine until a few weeks ago. Part of his activism was self-funding the study of medicine outside of this country. He can speak for himself. And Delani from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation and the youth clubs of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. So you can see there's a diversity of voices and a diversity of organizations. But still it scares me that there's not enough of us. Sometimes I worry that, are we part of the problem? Because we set up these organizations and then we make it difficult for people. We intimidate people with the language of activists, the acronyms that we use, the words that people don't understand, the arrogance that we sometimes exude, perhaps the overconfidence, I don't know. But I guess these are questions that that keep me awake at night, and that make me think that we have to ask deep questions. Because if activism is going to change the world, and we have to do nothing short of changing the world, then it has to become something that is made up of millions of skilled, capable, organized activists who build a different type of power to the power that we face on a day-to-day basis when we go out on the streets. So Zuki, I don't really want to say anything more in this discussion except to challenge the people on this panel and the people who are still with us to try to grapple with these questions, if indeed they are questions that we should be asking ourselves. Thanks.
What I forgot to mention was that Mark is himself a prolific activist, which is why he's so passionate. But I think the first question I'd like to sort of start the panel off with is activism personal? Do you have to be personally affected in order for you to get up, march to the streets, write petitions, fundraise, in order for you to be activist? Is that what it takes to be an activist? So I think I'll start with the vet on the stage, not Mark. Tanika.
Partly both. I think that activism, the decision to throw oneself into a course of action is often very personal. And it often is born of one's worldview and an innate sense of justice, I hope, and being outraged by something that you've seen, witnessed, or experienced, or you've seen happen to other people. I became, I guess, an activist at a very early age. I was born into a forced removal from Kwalanga, where my grandfather had a garden and a rather larger house, and the next time I saw them, their circumstances were somewhat reduced. And then the second big removal in my life was from my idyllic home in Alice, in the university town of Fort Hare. My parents were kicked out of there, and years of strife and poverty followed. So it's partly personal, partly a decision to make your beliefs publicly relevant and to impact policy and how human beings relate to each other and how society is constructed.
Right. Thanks for that, Tandega. I'll pose the same question to you, Sia, just because you gave us a very limited intro of yourself. But I think your story is actually quite interesting because you're in the food sovereignty space. And I don't know that too many people understand the importance of food sovereignty, specifically from a human rights perspective. But how you came into that space, for me, is a particularly interesting story. But, you know, contextualize it in, should it be personal in order for you to be activist?
Yeah, thanks, Zuki. For me, thanks for such a great insight, how it actually just I love how personal it gets on your side. And for me, being thrown into the space for activism most likely it's not something as much as personal as maybe it felt on your side. But also my belief in terms of being in a space, forgive me, Zuki, maybe just by just diving to other question to this case to say how I just look at activism is that obviously it doesn't really have to affect you personally. But when you see the unjust happening in the society, I've got the right to stand up and say no, but what you're doing is unjust, it's unright, and coming back to me being thrown into the space of being an active in the food sector, it comes way long to the community that I'm from. It obviously, I'm coming from a community that actually involves of most of I would say 40% of foreign nationals, just to from our research that we've thrown in a space. And then what makes us to say being most of them not being part of the government subsidies to get food grants or a 350 grant that just cater for anyone who's not part of the South African context but the rights to food. So it's does anyone needs to have documentation to actually to be able to eat? Then later let's just fix why you here without maybe undocumented, whatever the case would be. So especially then for me, I think you see from my talk where I'm coming from, Edible Street Gardens, where I then do more of see an open spaces in a pavement, then I create gardens then for people just to be able to just have something to eat. And there's at least if the government cannot be able to cater you, I've got free seeds that I can just be able to just cater for you guys, just at least to be able to eat. And then from there, and then it's then for me, it was just to start a conversation with the government or anyone in the community, just to be able to see where, how much do we then see, how do we then differentiate with are we helping South Africans only, or are we helping just anyone who just hungry at the moment? And then let's just fix any other issues that actually comes with it in the process. So for me, then Zuki, it's just more I'm just looking at anyone regardless of where you're from, but it's just let's just be all full now, and then from there, and then we just fix the other issues that actually comes with us. And then that's where the food sovereignty comes in the picture, just to make sure that food sovereignty simply means that everyone's got the rights to food. You know what I mean? and then the way that how you get your food, and then we all have to go with how are we following the values of like good practice into getting your food, and then that's the whole scenario comes into picture. Thanks.
Jennifer, I think yours is also particularly interesting. You are in the martial arts space, and you're a young woman, and from Hillbrow and that kind of community. It's the what's happening in the community, what sort of spurred you into it, or have you always just been a social justice warrior?
Okay, so for me personally, I agree with both of the panelists that have just said. For me, I would say it's personally, but it can also be what you've been exposed to, not just exposed to in like your community or where you're from. It can be from media, the radio, what you've heard that have triggered a cause within you to want to strive for for change out there. Do you understand what I mean? So for me as a young woman, I was in a space whereby, how can I put this? I was in a male-dominated space. And through that, I realized that most young women and young females are not getting an opportunity, even though they're being educated about it, even though it's in the media that women can be in such male-dominated spaces. But these young women from the inner city or from disadvantaged areas, not only from disadvantaged areas, let me not classify it in that way, but how can I put this? These young women, even from wherever they come from, whatever background, they're still afraid to be in such spaces. They're still afraid to take charge, to be in such areas that are male-dominated, like martial arts. So I took the charge to be like, let me be the first woman that allows the space to accommodate women, whether from whatever background, so that they can also get the opportunity to be a part of what martial arts. And like Sia said, I was listening to him so carefully. And through the course, it started off with like the martial arts. But there's a lot of factors that you get exposed to that trigger more purpose, that trigger more causes that you want to change as an activist. So with me, it became mental health. I saw these women needed help with mental health. There was a lot of factors that I ended up advocating for, just from actually starting with the one cause that I set myself up to like, I need to change this in my community. And right now, there's a huge spectrum. And right now, it not only like am I advocating for those issues, but I've allowed other young people to see that it's possible to be an activist in your community. I've opened the door and gave them courage to have a platform where they can actually advocate in their communities. And I feel like as people, it gets quite hard when everyone would want to be an activist, but this big weight, like Mark said, it's like, where do I actually start? Do you understand? What should I actually do? And having people in the community that have started it and are still in this work, it also gives those people a platform that you can start from nothing. You can be a part of this community. You can start from volunteering just for a cause, or you can start off with your own program and be the leader of that community. So that's it from my side. So it goes both ways with me personally.
Gadeko, you were quite literally thrown into a situation. I'm sure studying medicine, this was never what you had anticipated. But I just want to hear from your sort of perspective, because you could have just come home and just quietly gone off and lived your life. What kind of made you decide that you're now going to take up the battle for all the other students as well?
For me, my journey to activism, as you said, recently started when I came back from Ukraine. So I found that for me personally, activism has to center around compassion, because I felt like we weren't given enough compassion by or support by our government. I was able to receive personal funds to come back into South Africa after the war broke out. And then when I was back, I found that some of my brothers and sisters that are still in Ukraine don't have funds, or in other bordering countries of Ukraine. So I took it upon myself, to tend to the media, make it aware that there are still people that are South African that are stuck in Ukraine. Some were having to take ice and put it into plastics and boil it to make water, just so they could drink it. So I felt that it was my opportunity, having had the funds to, go to the media, make it known that that's the situation there, And then now that they are back, we're collectively as a group trying to pressure the government to help us continue our disrupted studies. So also what I found is that like on a scale, if we're comparing, compassion was a major factor in that other governments, were supplying their students or citizens with free transportation, reparation flights, and then we were just left stranded. So it's my mission now as being here, to help those.
You are probably, part of one of the most compassionate of the human rights organizations that are out there, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. So for you, how did you find yourself there? What keeps you there?
I think it's the fact that we come from a journey of no's and mostly yeses, but the fact that our work is not yet done. So in your intro, you spoke very well about the fact that this year marks 62 years since the Sharpeville massacre, and we will also be celebrating some of the gains of our democracy, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And we have an array of examples, Mark being some of them, as well as other struggle stalwarts. But we also don't have a shortage of causes. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I think you spoke about compassion as well as Unkateko, and I think that's the drive that needs to push people to activism. So what do I deserve better? What does the next person deserve better? What does the granny who lived down my street deserve better? We live in a society that pretends that certain people don't exist, that members of the LGBTQI community don't exist, that people living with disabilities don't exist, and that trans people don't exist. So I think those are all of the notions that we need to continually challenge. It doesn't have to be personal. It can be. It does not have to be personal. But once again, I think it's just an awareness of wanting to make a change and wanting to change the world, and realizing that there's a lot of people that we can work with who can help us in this mission. I think one of the examples for me, and it's a brilliant example, that in the 1960 Women's March, Uncle Kathy contributed towards making that march a success. So he used his vehicle to ensure the women who were planning that march. So he felt that he doesn't have to be part of the women's movement and so forth, but because he understood the cause and he wanted to contribute to it, that he lent his support the best way that he knew how. So I do think that we need to be a bit more compassionate. And once again, there's a lot of either movements or causes that we can get involved in. It doesn't have to directly hit at you, but it might hit at the next person.
Yeah, thanks for that. Sharia, you are well on your way to being a career activist at this point, from FISMAS 4, which was quite intense in itself. You're now involved with the Pay the Grants campaign, board member at Section 27. I just, what is it that drives you to serially be involved in all of these activists?
Yeah, none of these are paid, by the way. So it's exhausting, but it's also something I can't really stop myself from doing. And I would say that the volume of work that I've taken on has definitely decreased, if I'm being honest, which is something I feel very uncomfortable with, but it's also difficult to sustain that level if it isn't your career. And so that's, the big challenge that we all face. But I think over and above the imagination that it takes to sustain your involvement, and to stand for something and to challenge an unjust status quo, it is about sustaining human beings, creating a political culture, and I think most importantly, as the Vagina Monologues describes it, ensuring that people feel safe, feel seen, and feel cherished. And each one of these amazing people that we've heard before I speak have said that in different ways. Being a good activist is really about also building relationships And I think those spaces that one creates are filled with those relationships, and that's how you sustain momentum, and that's how you figure out how to take one idea and create an intersectional and a spectrum, as you said, a spectrum of issues that support it and that take it to the next level. So when we think about Fees Must Fall and the struggle for decommodified and decolonized education, it's in no way separate to pay the grants and the struggle for basic income, because all of these struggles are fundamentally connected. It's in no way separate to an anti-war movement. It's in no way separate to having a fully functional healthcare system, because all of these issues, all of these causes, as we like to separate them, are not at all separate. It's about living with dignity. It's about making sure people feel seen, feel safe, and feel cherished. Whether or not you're personally affected in a direct sense. I mean, I was never someone who didn't have funding to cover my fees at university, or at any point in my life I didn't know what it felt like to be hungry and to go without food. But the fact that you are a human being and you can have empathy and you can see an unjust system and want to do something about it is enough to start trying to understand what it is that you can contribute to in whatever form.
So one of the things that I always think about, like it's great, the work that you guys are doing, the aspirations, the kind of blueprint that you're basing it off of, which is human rights, compassion, always wanting to contribute to society. But I'd like to know, what are the challenges that, activism presents? Because, quite often people are, and it was in the last panel that this was mentioned, that people's lives are put online. You put your actual life on the line, whether it's your livelihood and you may lose your job, or whether it's, petitioning against big business, in Kolobeni. What are the challenges that you face on a daily basis, and how do you get around that? Whoever wants to go first.
Can I just say that at the moment the problem, I'm also concerned about what Mark says, these waves of activism. At the bottom of the wave, you find very few people involved, but at the top of the wave, you find mass movements. And I'm concerned that so many of the things that we fought for as part of the social movements that brought about this democracy, as part of the UDF, as part of the equal education campaigns of the time, part of COSAS of the time, part of Young Christian Students at the time. So that was a wave that became a mass movement in the 1980s and brought about the kind of democracy, at least on paper, that we have. And the most heartbreaking regressions are the way in which, in just a few decades, we have rolled back not only the movements, but the values that society had imbibed during that period of mass surge, where there was each one teach one, the ultimate compassion of the education activists. There were communities that wouldn't let each other go hungry. There were street committees and so on. But if you look at how unviable our society has become due to unemployment, poverty, and the fragmenting of society, it looks like as a movement we failed. So I'm so concerned about that. I'm also concerned that at the moment there is a huge fight back by capital, by corporations, and by institutions against whistleblowers, against people who want to live out, and democracy defenders who want to live the values of the Bill of Rights and want all those rights to pertain to other members of society. So I'm really worried about the levels of victimization of human rights defenders. And I think that there's a legal challenge that we must take on to look at some of the laws, particularly like the Protected Disclosures Act, the Witness Protection Act. We need to look at those laws and shift back the onus of proof. Like with women, the onus of proof is on the victim, and that's too huge an onus to carry. So we must shift it back onto the perpetrator in a granular fashion, in a technical way, in those laws. And we need to criminalize the behaviors. We must ratchet up the consequences of acting against activists, vulnerable human beings, women, and so on. So I think that's one of the challenges that we can take up going forward. Don't want to go on too much.
I think I'll just go to what you just mentioned. In our everyday society, we face quite a lot of bullying from the police, from the JMPD. Just the minute you just you're being approached by your SAPS or your JMPD, that bullying is just already just try and then whatever that you just want to stand against, look, I'm all abiding, the law abiding citizen, but the fact that how much you just that fear that you get, the minute you just being approached by the people who are supposed to be protecting you against the law, then someone's just supposed to come and approach you, is look, you've got the right to do A, B, and C, but they already just, that approach just takes away all those rights that you have. So then how much rights do you have as you want to try and then be a law-abiding citizen to say, look, this is what I stand against for. And then, like I said earlier, that it's so difficult to be a South African, if I may, it's just so difficult being a South African, well, in South Africa, where you just, every time you just want to try and then say, look, this is what our constitution stands for, and then, but you don't get to hear that from your law-abiding citizens supposed to be making sure that the law is upheld, from the police, for instance, and then how much more from your government that are actually just supposed to lead you in that space. So those are the things that you just as I was saying earlier, that to be an activist, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be an activist in your field, but anything that you feel that is just unjust in your society, and then just stand out. However happens afterwards, just it doesn't matter, but at least you did stand up for what you believe is right. And we're fortunate enough now that we in this democracy where we can actually be able to speak out to how we feel currently, and then at least unlike what happened in the apartheid system, where you just whenever just be able to speak out to whatever you believe is not right, then we don't know what will happen the next day for you. But now we've got that opportunity, so I think everyone among us has got the right to exercise what they feel is unjust in their communities, in the country, in the world for per se. I think I would just encourage anyone out there that they feel what you think that is happening in your community or in your household or in your society, just try and speak out, just to make sure that we all, what you see is unjust, just try and then just speak out.
It seems to me that, did you want to add something? It seems to me that being an activist also opens you up to being, victimized, and knowing your rights opens you up to being victimized, which in itself bears reflection, particularly on Human Rights Day. So you have a government that says it's Human Rights Day, let's all reflect on what human rights means, let's all celebrate our human rights, and yet when you try to actually vindicate or exercise those human rights, you get victimized. So for me, it's I suppose it's a hypocritical way of looking at human rights, for people. And so, who should be an activist? Because not everybody is in a position to be able to bounce back. Should everybody be an activist? If we all rise up and become activists, does it mean that the tide is going to turn?
I mean, I think when we have this typical image in our minds of who an activist is, it sometimes overrides the everyday struggles that people have to go through. So it's an active choice for some people, but it's a lived reality, just fighting every day against a system that was built against you for some people. For most people in this country, actually. So even the way that we use language around activism can be somewhat elitist and exclusionary if we think about it in that broad sense. But you're right. It does create a space for vulnerability. We know that during the Zondo Commission, it came out. Many of us suspected it. But there's surveillance on people that are deemed activists by the state, right? And nothing has come out of that. We find civil society is in a very weak position to challenge these realities. And we also see that Sobukwe's statement that the tree of freedom is watered with blood is still very much applicable. It echoes into the present. When we look at the fact that Mtokozisi Ntumba was just a bystander, a year ago when the protests were happening at Wits University, was gunned down by police with rubber bullets. The police haven't said anything about accountability, and there also hasn't been any government response or engagement with demands from civil society to ban the use of rubber bullets. So we're seeing the spaces that have been created just, becoming smaller and smaller, and that requires more voices, but also more action. So the people that are here today, each one of us is active in a particular space, but we can also build and help each other around the various issues that are spoken about. So when we talk about basic incomes and food sovereignty, those are entirely linked. Free media and the struggle of journalism, that's also linked. Mental health and the community work that happens every day. We all find ourselves in communities where we can take that and build on it in our own ways, and that spreads. The struggle of university students across the world, there's that intersection that we need to get onto. And then anti-racism and health justice. So being an activist is knowing that you're not just speaking to people here, but this is an opportunity to connect in a very deep way, and I hope that we'll do that as well.
Gadego?
I was going to say that, sorry, I think that anybody can be an activist in the sense that, for me personally, I define an activist as anybody who wants to make the environment a better place or their world a better place. It could be socially or politically. That could be addressing an issue or challenging those in power. But sometimes when it comes to challenging those in power, I feel like you need to be a bit more diplomatic, have a proper balance between the emotional and the technical. Have compassion, be compassionate about your cause, but also open up an opportunity to negotiate with the people that you are challenging. Like with my situation, where I found that now we're in a situation where our studies are disrupted, and we didn't receive support in terms of coming back and getting financial assistance. How do we gather our pain and our trauma, and at the same time go to these people and ask them to integrate us into their programs? Other countries like Ireland were more compassionate and supportive in the sense that they understood the situation, that it's war, you can't really, plan for that, but we're here, we're going to integrate you into our system.
So I think that the times in which we live in require all, if not most of us, to be active and not be passive, and not remain silent on issues. And I just want to quote, so Mark was amongst the people who developed a workbook that the foundation uses to train young people and introduce them to activism. So in that workbook, Katrada writes a letter to young people, and it reads, "The days ahead of us will be dark, and there will be many ups and downs in our struggle. It is for these dark days that we must prepare for many a comrade might begin to feel disillusioned, hopeless, and helpless. Some will lose confidence in our struggle and fall by the wayside. There is no such thing as defeat. We expect you and each and every one of you to play your part in whatever you do. Sports, social, economic, and cultural. Remember the struggle. So I think this, and just the fact that we are having these conversations, speak to the fact that we will be tired, but we should not take a step back. I think activism now is much more urgent than it was ever before. It means that we need to, like Shara pointed out, find linkages with one another. We need to recharge each other. I think we will not achieve anything, so whether it's small victories, small gains, but we'll not achieve anything if we sit back and become passive and give in to defeat.
Yeah. I think the recharging part is just something that I've been thinking about in terms of, in as much as it's a necessary thing, it takes its toll on you. It has a mental health component that goes with it. So the question becomes about, who takes care of the activist and their mental health while you're out there fighting the battle. How do you also make sure that you're not losing, the internal mental health battle within yourself? So how do you constantly make sure that you recharge? I know a lot of activists will be like, well, I recharge because I know I'm doing good and this is what I'm passionate about, but you're still, constantly in the game. So how do you guys take care of your mental health, Shara?
It's not a simple thing. I think it's got many dimensions to it, though the one that really helps me is my spirituality, but also knowing when to slow down. In 2015 and 2016, I was crazy. I really did not live very healthily. I survived on Red Bull, and I picked up 20 kilos. And it's not about weight gain, but it's also about the impact on your health, like my hands would shake. It really wasn't a healthy way to live, and many people who cared about me made me see that and tried to create spaces for me to, I wouldn't say slow down. I mean, I had to slow down. The police had shot us, so we had no choice. But that taught me about creating sustainable spaces within movements. And so now with, work we've done around pay the grants, it's a constant question, how do we share responsibility in a way that doesn't put too much on one person's shoulders or two people's shoulders. And like we had rotating conveners, for example. That meant every week a different person would have a turn to convene the subcommittee that we were working on within what was then known as the C19 People's Coalition, the COVID-19 People's Coalition. Also not tolerating toxic behavior from individuals in these spaces. I think we weren't that good on that front during Fees Must Fall. We let a lot slide. And a lesson that I've learned is that you have to be tender. So tenderness is fundamental, but firmness is equally fundamental, so that you don't create an unhealthy space. Then it collapses. Those are some of the things that we constantly have to grapple with. I don't claim to know all the answers, but I'm definitely learning as I go along.
Jennifer?
Well, can I just add on to what you just said? And I'll just put it on my own personal experience. So being a young woman, and I'll just really say my age, I'm still 20, and I've been in a space where I have to sit in board meetings with old people, no, not as old people, but with people that have much more experience in this field that I'm currently partaking. And it becomes quite hard, honestly speaking, and I've had times where I literally break down and you find yourself questioning, am I being the best leader that I've set myself up to being? And I also strive for mental health, and if I'm the person that's actually breaking down, what are those people that I'm trying to lead going to say? You often find yourself in that space where you question yourself. So basically what I have put into place is that the networking that's been happening, being involved with other activism, being involved with other people that are doing the work that you're currently doing, can can bring you up again when you're feeling like low. So with me personally, when I'm on my lowest days, I have people that I can actually reach out to that are actually in the space and doing the kind of work that I'm actually doing, and be like, okay, I'm facing this and this. I'm facing this type of toxic behavior from this type of person and whatever. What can I actually do? And their experiences and their input on how they've dealt with the situation kind of calms me down back and brings me back to the cause that I'm actually striving for. So that is the whole thing, the whole mechanism that I have been using personally to try by all means to come back on my lowest days, to come back even much more stronger, and acknowledging and being aware that there are going to be days where I don't want to get out of bed. There are going to be hard days where I couldn't handle a toxic situation the way I would have wanted it to be. But those days are just to empower me and strengthen me so that I come up with better ways that I can solve those situations. And also having to look up to other activists that have been in this thing for a long run, and them impacting me and motivating me to keep on going is what I've been using all this time. Yeah, that's it for me.
I just want to build off of what you've just mentioned and Cherry just mentioned, which is toxic people and making sure that you guard against toxic people and toxic behavior, but also what Thandeka mentioned earlier, which is sort of the regression. After making the gains, how do you guard against regressing? And my actual point is, as activists, because you're the do-gooders, everybody loves you. You guys are the superheroes of the world. There is, a potential for getting into your echo chambers and building yourselves up, and, you're kind of detached from reality because you are the saviors of the world, and, invariably things end up getting corrupted. So how do you guard against, the over-valorizing of each other? How do you guard against making sure that, you don't find yourself betraying your own struggles, because certain concessions are made here, maybe for the sake of speeding things up to get whatever, your particular project may be. How do you guys guard against not being corrupted?
I think your question is more how do we find a balance in our struggles that we go through, and I think also my good question which is posed to you, for instance, in the media industry, how do you guys find a balance to just come and capture such challenge that we actually live within them? And then we're finding so much challenges. And then in your reporting, how do you guys make sure you still report in a way that how I felt as you actually come and then interacted with me in a field, how I felt? I think you guys are the biggest activists that you can actually just come and then capture my story and then still be able to say it the way I actually felt that you connected with me as you portrayed out in the world, because there's also just you guys, I believe you are activists in your own field in the media industry, and also just how much it's just there's so much influence from politics and other field in your field. So for me, that's you guys are the heroes of just making sure we are here today and we are able just to chat about this conversation that are sort of so touching and really just so not a good conversation from maybe could be our government or anyone that are actually just following whatever your publication, for instance. So that for me is just it's a start that I think we are in the right direction to really shape this country into its best. For instance, I'll just give credit to you guys for your work that you actually do in your field.
May I say something? There are three ways I think which I think I consciously tell myself I should watch myself around in order to guard against my own potential for hubris and stuff like that. And I think the first thing that I noticed, particularly in our industry, was that when we began to stand up as the SABC 8, we stood up because we wanted to cover South Africa's people who were protesting against the lack of service delivery. So we protested the muzzling or the muting of the public voice in our democracy. So one of us, a young lady called Suna Fenta, stood up, and we didn't look after her enough, I think. They started sending all of us death threats. They started chasing us in the streets and in our cars. Suna started taking pictures of each of her tires of the wheels being carried. She used to carry them and take a picture of herself and send them to the rest of us. They tied her to a tree and shot her in the face. When vested interests in big capital are for the muzzling of the poor, you have to watch yourself in supporting giving solidarity and love and kindness to the ones to other people in your circle or other activists. So one thing I try is to support other activists, no matter what they're doing, like in your food, things. I have a big interest in food, so and find ways in which you can offer loving solidarity to comrades. And then the other thing is I watch myself around money. When corporations sidle up to you, and particularly those with commercial vested interests in your area, our country is very under-regulated when it comes to big business. So in our area, MultiChoice came prowling around, supporting even the NGOs that used to support us. And when we indicated that we are for the original principles and we are uncomfortable with commerce sidling up to comrades, the comrades now started to vilify us, joining capital. And for example, that would play itself out in our call for universal access to digital equipment, whereas MultiChoice wanted the analog signal to continue. And yet the SABC was paying 92 million a month and $1 billion a year almost, if you count the arrears, for you not to hear in siXhosa, in siZulu, in siVenda, muting the rights available in Section 6 of the Constitution. So when you read vested interests, then you are able not to sidle up to money, because money, once it comes into your cause and it's not properly governed, can be very toxic, and it can go to comrades' heads and it can give them a disproportionate power. And then when the state sidles up to you, you have to be equally wary, but also conscious that this is the state's job. The state is the collective people, so it's we the people. This is our state, we voted it in, if our vote is worth anything. So it's difficult to be wary of your own state, but you must be.
So I think for me, it's around the fact that activism is not an exclusive and elite phenomenon. It is about signing the petition, it's about joining the demonstration, it's also about audience participation and engagement as well. So I think that for me really stands out. And also the understanding that, we shouldn't sanctify or glorify activists, because ultimately they're still human. So one minute you might admire them, and then the next you might find them in, say, compromising positions. And I think that can demoralize people, and it can turn the entire notion of activism into something really, really toxic. So I think anybody can get into activism, and those who are already in, I think it's important to base and ground our movements in facts and truth.
I just want to pick up on the issue of the state relationship with activists and with activism. Because quite often it seems to be an antagonistic kind of relationship. The state sees you as thorns in their sides, and so they try to thwart you, and then you keep coming back. But, you know, inevitably you kind of need each other to function. We all need to kind of, you know, create those kinds of networks and be able to work together and convince each other that we're all working towards a common cause. How do you do that? Because, like I said, it's pretty rough with, you know, the South African government at the moment. How do you create the sense of, I'm not the enemy?
They say textbooks, the court says textbooks, they don't deliver the textbooks. They say ARVs, they create outages.
Maybe I should say something on that. I
Yeah,
mean,
now you're on the panel.
yeah. Look, the first thing is that I don't think that activism is inherently against the government or against the state. What we're trying to do a lot of the time is to get the government to govern on behalf of poor people. We're trying to get the government to do what the Constitution says, which is to organize our country towards social justice. So we have to have quite a nuanced relationship with government. You know, Thandeka referred to antiretrovirals and the treatment action campaign. You know, in those years it was difficult because on the one hand, we were being described as the enemies of the state. Thabo Mbeki was calling us pharmaceutical company stooges for the pharmaceutical companies. He was trying to mobilize public opinion against us. But on the other hand, we knew that Thabo Mbeki wasn't the whole of the ANC. We knew there were good people in the ANC who we had to try to reach out to and to try to challenge internally. When it came to the state, you had somebody like Dr. Mantu Shabalala Msimang, if you remember, who was horrible. I mean, she made me cry in one meeting. I'm not joking. I cried. I burst into tears, partly because, you know, when I was much younger, I lost 2 children soon after, just before birth. So I knew what it was like to be a parent and to lose children, and then to sit in a room with somebody who didn't care and who mocked you and misrepresented what your motives were, was too painful. But then again, Mantu wasn't the Department of Health, the whole Department of Health. There were people in the Department of Health who were activists, people like us. They couldn't stand up at that time because they would have been crushed. But they were there. And when we were able to eventually shift, when we started to win in our struggle, and when Thabo Mbeki was pushed aside and we won in the Constitutional Court, then because we hadn't alienated everybody in government, because we hadn't painted everybody with the same brush, the good people came out and they were prepared to help, and we were able to work with them together to roll out a program of antiretrovirals that eventually got to 5 million people. And I think that probably applies in all of our relationships with the state. Activists need to capture the state without being captured as you capture it, because we have some powers, But we don't have the powers that are given to government by the Constitution. We don't have the resources that are given to government by the budget. We don't have the right to regulate private companies because they make medicines too expensive or they make food too expensive. All of those powers are given to government. Our job is to find a way to get government, I feel, to wield those powers. So you're constantly navigating, balancing in this relationship, working out what is the best way to behave and speak and act at any moment in time.
I assume everyone agrees with Mark. Okay. So Delani did say that activism is also about audience engagement. So I'm going to give people in the audience a chance to ask questions, but before I do that, I just want to pick up on this issue of resources, which Mark mentioned and Tanega did mention as well. You know, activists most times don't have resources, so you're literally always trying to find somebody to believe in your cause, and it becomes difficult. You know, how do you navigate, you know, being able to amass enough resources, but also convince people that it's the right thing to do to resource activists and their organizations?
I would say the first resource would be using your voice to speak out, like telling your story authentically. Like for me, I didn't go to any broadcasting media station and shout. Like from just telling my story on Twitter, I was able to get attention to my cause, and then from there people started flocking through and supporting, and then also speaking as a collective with a bigger voice through social media and such platforms. Like it's a resource that you can use.
Sia?
It's quite difficult to be a voice and have that free spirit without being captured, as Mark was saying. That you often just find other partners that are sort of seems to be following what you stand for, but with money, and then you eventually just don't become what you actually really stand out for the community or for the people. But you end up just falling through to what they actually just want you to fall, or completely just crush you all together. So it's quite a challenge. Yes, there is such out there, but it is a challenge as an activist to still stand to your words while there's backing up voices that actually are just helping you to stand in for what you believe for.
Do you want to add something?
Constant struggle trying to materially support the issues that you need to sustain. And it's no joke. I mean, you have to consider in this day and age now as well how expensive data is, and the fact that civil society had to mobilize mostly online during the pandemic. That was one of our biggest challenges. So, you know, identifying the practical challenges, but also the structural challenges, and where we can sustainably move beyond the practical challenges so that they don't exist anymore. So the issues around data and the issues around South African business, for example, being more involved in civil society, because I think it sort of has separated itself, and that's a big mistake. Because when things are tough, where does business go, really? So I think there's definitely antagonisms in these relationships beyond government and activists. It's also activists in business. You know, there's multiple interests at play, and like Thandeka said, you have to be aware of them, you have to navigate them, but also beyond self-interest and being aware of your own interests, it's understanding what other people's are and understanding that there's always going to be ego and ignorance. So as an activist, you're not just trying to build support for whatever issue or struggle that you're backing, but you're also having to deal with the fact that as much as there's ignorance, there's humility. As much as there's ego, there's also selflessness that exists in these spaces. And so love and solidarity are, unbeatable if we look at our history, if we look at the way in which our freedom was won and continues to be fought for. We don't have a choice but to be optimistic but to keep trying. And I think that's the internal dilemma that you have as an activist. It can get so difficult that it would be easy to just go get a consulting job at McKinsey. But that's not something that you have to necessarily do. And it's also not something that, if you do have to do, stops your contribution. Like Mark said, in every space, there are people, there are good people. But it's about tapping into that and showing that those good people, that there's a way for them to make a contribution. And so I think a lot of your work as an activist is about, like I said, building relationships.
So I think, just to add on to that as well, resources will always be a huge challenge. And I'm saying this coming from an NGO background. But I think resources don't always have to be materialistic or material. So even volunteerism can be a resource. I know that at the Katarara Foundation, we're also quite big in acknowledging and honoring those who give towards the foundation. So whether it's administratively, whether it's a printing machine or whatever the case is, that ensures that the work gets done. So it doesn't have to be financial. It can also be just small acts of people lending their hand, their expertise, and so forth. So I think it's just cultivating that and ensuring that we're able to take the work forward through whatever resources the people can provide.
Right. Thank you. So I'd like to open it up to the floor for anyone who has some burning questions that they'd like to put to the panel. The first burning question. Oh, Mike? It's on. It's on. Yes.
Oh, I can't hear myself.
We can hear you.
I'm not your conventional doctor. I'm African doctor. Candidating is one of my mentors. I don't want to say was. I want to say is. And a project is just read. What motivates me all the time whenever I seek to take a detour, manipulate myself. When I'm looking at this young lady next to you, along with Nompendulo and others, I'm that mother that actually started the Feast Must Fall with them. In actual fact, I'm the former chairperson of Greater Johannesburg in the ANC Women's League, among other deployments. Served also in the Gauteng province within community safety, where I established victim empowerment centers because of the experiences of the series of victimization that I experienced from infancy. And somebody would ask, how is that possible? What I'm learning is this. When you are an activist, you cannot delegate it to a particular agenda. It becomes your DNA. And it has a potential of becoming magnetic, you see? you attract or you are attracted to something that you need to deal with, one way or the other. And vilification is part of the journey. It is a journey. I'm saying this because for a person that was born within a family of academics, religious family, Mayatula family, custodians of the organization that everybody embraces, the African National Congress, I'm supposed to share their sentiments whenever they do whatever decisions they take and support. But unfortunately, I am of the view that if you are a legitimate activist, you stick to your guts. When you are you're asking a question, what is it? And I think maybe if I put it in my own terms, what is it that sustains activists? It's your mentality. You make sure that your mentality, it is not strong, but at the same time, it just fluctuates. As whatever it is that you are met with, you have to make sure that you deal with it, regardless of how many people are going to support you and how many people are going to actually be anti whatever it is that you are standing up for. One of the things that I came to appreciate is SABC. You guys, you don't know how much activism you actually portray out there. And if you were not existing, I don't think in actual fact you would have places to go or somebody to talk to. I think we would all be dead, because nobody wants anybody to say anything that is not in line with the agenda of the day. Now, one of the things that I would appreciate, though, is something that I once spoke with Uncle Kathy. It became a struggle at some point, because when I was serving in one of the boards within Johannesburg Development Agencies, he said to me, what are you doing about your life? Then I said, my intention is to actually write. In actual fact, that came as a resource, because when I thought of his voice, I actually wrote a book, Challenges of Life.
Sorry not to cut you off, but can we get to the question, just because we're running out of time?
Now, my question is, as a foundation or other foundation also, how can you be of assistance to the activists out there? Or is it possible for the activists to align themselves with the foundations in terms of your core existence? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that was directed to the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation.
So one of the things that the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation prides itself on is the fact that we are non-partisan, even though we are orientated around issues that would call us to be involved in either current affairs issues and so forth. So our doors are always open for either young people or activists, actually anyone who's willing to engage and interact with the Kathrada Foundation. One of the young people with whom you spoke about, Unompendulo, in one of the sessions where we hosted her, even remarked that she had found a home in the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation in the sense that she felt it welcomed her as she was. It didn't require her to mold herself into something or someone that she isn't. And I think that's a culture that we try and instill amongst everyone that we interact with. So you're more than welcome to align yourself with the Katarata Foundation. We are willing to engage with you or anybody else. I think just as long as we get a sense of, you know, whether our values are align and explore the possibilities of working together.
Is there another question from the audience?
If you speak, come and ask your question
Do you
from
wanna-
here so that you can be...
I can project.
Okay, but the cameras need to catch you for Facebook Live.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jason. Should I stand right here? Right, so I volunteer for various organizations in different respects. And I can say that I want to be an activist, but I'm not too sure how. I'm not too sure what it takes. I'm not too sure how to start as just an individual, you know? I've tried YouTubing it, you know, how to be an activist. But I didn't find any information of value. So what I'd like to ask is how to start being effective as an individual. So be it, there's various sectors I can relate with. Let me just, for example, growing up with HIV taught me that, okay, not everybody's gonna talk about it. You know, people are gonna shy away, even if it's your family members, right? So how do I now, as this HIV positive individual, become an HIV activist without having to overexert myself to get institutions involved? Just how to be impactful as an individual who's trying to be an activist?
Good.
You've come to the right panel.
I don't think I'm the best person to answer
no,
that.
no.
I think
I'm just going to say a quick thing because I also need to get going now, so I want this to be my wrap-up. But you are an activist. You already are an activist if you're contributing to various spaces in different ways and you identify as a person living with HIV and you talk about these issues to people and you represent the struggles and the realities of what a person in your situation is going through. There's nothing else you need to prove. You already are an activist. So can we just give him a round of applause? That's not to say that activism requires rounds of applauses, because it doesn't, and you know that the work that you'll do is going to grow. And I would speak for each one of us here to say that if we can help in any way, then we're here. I'm going to leave my email with you guys. It's Shaira Kala, SHAEERA, KAAA @gmail.com. So if I can help in any way, I'm happy to do that. But be careful of the individual activist, because there are communities of activists that are so nurturing and challenging as well. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture when there isn't one. But there's a lot of roses amongst the thorns. And I would say that it would be great to link you up with organizations and grassroots movements, whatever you feel comfortable, where you find a home yourself. Delani spoke about homes. We can have many homes. For me, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation as well has been a home over the years. And those homes can connect you to other homes. So don't be so modest about your contributions and your aspirations. More strength to you.
Thanks, Sharon. Is there any other question from the audience?
Hi, my name's Bridget. I wanted to find out something. We live in a suburb that is a very activist suburb. We've held MNCs to count, we're holding city councillors to count, we're holding city power to count, and city water. How would you, sometimes we think of activism as being something that's got to be out there, it's got to be covered on television, it's got to be things like that. We live in a neighborhood where when things need help, there's a lot of, or when things need to be dealt with, there's a lot of activists, and I call them activists because they are civil activists that come out and they do things. What would any of you say to kind of promote more civil activism on the ground. And it's not done in a nasty way. It's doing exactly what Mark said. We've kind of got city officials in our pockets now, in the way, not in our pockets in a bad way, but in the way that we're working together. So it's almost private-public partnerships. We would obviously be seeing perhaps the residents as a private partnership, and the city officials who we do need for help with their need, the public partners. What would any of you give advice for us to tell people that are in these suburbs and that are fighting with things within their own suburbs and infrastructure? What advice would you give them? Because these are maybe not professional activists, but they're people that really feel strongly about getting their area working. Thanks.
I would say, like, just love your neighbor as you love yourself, and do unto others as you want them to do unto you. Like, once you see a person as how you see yourself, you're willing to treat them the same way, like give them the same love, you know, try to just make the world a better place. Yeah.
Can I just say, write, tweet, Facebook it, and phone your public broadcaster. It's yours. Make sure that the people who in your neighborhood who are doing good, that they can be emulated and they must be visible. In journalism, we normally say that if a tree falls in a forest and no one heard it or saw that it fell, it's as good as not having happened. So please share, tweet, and call your public broadcaster.
I think I'd just like to commend the work that you guys are doing. And I'm saying this because we are starting to see more and more communities standing up and demanding answers and demanding accountability. So we are seeing now, I know that in the Eastern Cape, there's a community that has mobilized, and they're taking the municipality to court because they are failing to provide them with the services that they deserve. And we're seeing this spreading across the country. And it also translated into, I think, the recent elections, when we saw whether it's individual candidates, standing up and contesting the elections. So I think that sort of civic activism is quite important. And I think South Africans are starting to get to grasp it a lot more and exercise it a lot more. So I really commend it.
Thank you. I think that would be the perfect note to end on, which is, the more practical side of how to be an activist. If you want to be an activist, there's various different ways of doing it. You don't have to be part of a formal organization. You can start as a one-man band and, go from there. But before we close, Mark Hayward has got some closing remarks for us.
Well, first of all, thank you all in this room for still being here on the third day of Human Rights Weekend, and thank you to the organizers of this Human Rights Festival for creating a space over 3 days for people to talk about these issues. Thank you to the panel. I hope you feel it was a rich discussion. I certainly feel like I've learned from the things that my fellow panelists have said and been inspired by what people have said. So thank you very much. I just want to finish with really two comments. Because I started with a bit of a kind of pessimistic note about how bad the world looks and feels and unequal it is at the moment. I want to finish with a more optimistic note. And that is that, in my years of being an activist, there are two things that have struck me all of the time. The first is that in this world, there are many, many, many more good people than bad people. I'm always surprised how bad is so powerful when good is so numerous. And you see good people and activists in every community working, not recognized, keeping hope alive in the communities that we live in. The challenge for us, I always think, is how do we organize good better? And that's partly what this panel has been about, the questions that we've been trying to probe. How do we stop so that, Sia knows about the work of Jennifer, even though they only live like 3 kilometers away from each other? How do we get Thandeka to be a mentor to Shaira, or Shaira to Jennifer, or how do we share our experiences as activists over the years to give people confidence? There was this one question about foundations. In a sense, we're all the foundation in and of ourselves. And the question for activists is, how does your personal foundation inspire other activists? So that's one point. Good should win if we organize better than we are organizing. And the second point I want to make, which is also something I've learned from activism, is people have power if they know how to use it. People have power at every level, at the lowest level of the community. Again, I pick on Jennifer because I know some of the work that she does with young women in Hillbrow. But an individual can transfer their power to other individuals. She didn't talk today about organizing this women's boxing club, Nirvana, and the conference of young women in Hillbrow that they held, and how, as she said, they discovered what they knew, which was inequality and gender inequality, but they didn't understand it properly, the young women. And anyway, Jennifer speaks better for herself, but I'm just saying, but we have that power. And, in this country at the moment, because of our constitution, as I think Thandeka was saying, we're probably the most powerful people in the world, compared to Zimbabwe or China or Ukraine, obviously, at the moment. We still have the power to demonstrate, we have the power to write, we have the power to petition, we have the power to research, we have the power to speak to each other, we have the power to shout at our government officials. We have a constitution that says that South Africa should be a country of equality and social justice. That's the highest law of the land. Says that government must work to create equality between people. And what I would say on this before I finish is, I learned that because when we started the treatment action campaign, we had 10 people demonstrating. But we've helped to save 5 million lives. 10 million people, 10 people worked and were able to save 5 million lives by getting antiretroviral medicines to people. When we started, nobody, not one person, got antiretroviral medicines. Today, 5.5 million people get antiretroviral medicines. The point is, we can do that on food. We can do that on women's equality. We can do that on education. We can do that on all of these issues if we learn where this power, how to ignite this power in ourselves. And for me, this panel and this discussion has been about people who have found power but are still looking for the best ways to be able to organize that power and sustain that power into the future. So thank you very much to everybody for this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dismissed.
Thank you.